One wrong word to these people, and you disappear forever. This unspoken rule governed Chicago's underworld, a fact that Alina Petrova knew nothing about as she approached table 7 with a bottle of aged Bordeaux, unaware her life would change with a single sentence. The grandest mansion-turned-restaurant in Gold Coast buzzed with Chicago's elite criminal underworld, though to Alina, it was just another private event, another night of generous tips at the upscale establishment, where she'd worked for barely 3 weeks. Her brown hair was pulled back in a tight bun, her movements efficient and practiced from years in the service industry. She moved between tables with practiced grace, her white uniform pristine against the crimson walls, her eyes downcast to avoid unwanted attention from patrons who considered service staff invisible until needed. Her hands trembled slightly as she approached the center table where he sat, a young man with piercing blue eyes and a face that graced local business magazines, though the sources of his wealth remained strategically vague to the public. The weight of unseen gazes pressed against her back as other diners subtly observed the interaction. Anatoli Volkov commanded attention without effort, his custom suit and quiet confidence marking him as someone born to power. Though at 29, he was unusually young to head what everyone called his import business. The conversation at his table hushed as Alina approached, the 4 men watching her with the calculated assessment of predators, an atmosphere so thick with tension, she nearly stumbled before catching herself. Each man wore similar expressions of wary assessment, hands casually close to concealed weapons beneath designer jackets. "The 82 Bordeaux, sir," she whispered, her voice betraying more nervousness than she intended as she presented the bottle for inspection, the crystal glasses on the table catching the dim overhead light. Anatoli nodded curtly, his expression coldly professional as he examined the label with the scrutiny of someone who detected falsehoods for a living, whether in wine authenticity or human loyalty. A gold ring with an unfamiliar crest glinted on his right hand as he turned the bottle. When he muttered something in Russian to the gray-haired man beside him, Alina's heart skipped a beat, the familiar cadence of her childhood language washing over her like an unexpected wave of homesickness. Without thinking, she responded in perfect Russian. The vineyard suffered drought that year, yet produced their finest vintage. My grandfather always said true strength emerges from hardship. Her accent was flawless, the dialect specifically from Moscow's eastern districts, revealing more about her background than she realized. The room seemed to freeze as Anatoli's head snapped up, his blue eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her blood run cold, the other men at the table tensing as though preparing for violence. Her manager appeared at her side instantly, face ashen with panic, grabbing her elbow with barely disguised urgency as he whispered, "You're needed in the kitchen immediately." Sweat beaded on his forehead as he tried to remove her from what he clearly perceived as imminent danger. Before she could be dragged away, Anatoli raised his hand, a simple gesture that halted her manager mid-step, the power dynamic instantly apparent as the older man released her arm and stepped back with deference. "You speak Russian like a native, yet work here serving wine," Anatoli observed, switching to English, his voice deceptively soft as he studied her with newfound curiosity, as though reassessing a puzzle piece that suddenly didn't fit. The dangerous edge beneath his polite tone made her skin prickle with warning. "My grandmother raised me, after my parents." Alina trailed off, instinctively knowing that revealing too much of herself in this room would be dangerous, though she couldn't understand why tension had replaced the oxygen. 3 days passed with no consequence from that night, almost convincing Alina she had imagined the strange intensity of the moment, until a sleek black car waited outside after her late shift ended at midnight. Steam rose from sewer grates along the empty street, creating an ethereal backdrop that heightened her sudden apprehension. The window lowered to reveal a woman with sharp features and calculating eyes, who simply said, "Mr. Volkov requests your presence for a job opportunity, one that pays significantly better than carrying trays." Her tone held no emotion, as though delivering a business proposition rather than what felt distinctly like a veiled command. Everything in Alina screamed danger, yet curiosity and the reality of her mounting student loans made her hesitate just long enough for the rear door to swing open invitingly. The leather interior gleamed in the streetlight, luxurious and threatening all at once. The headquarters of Volkov Imports occupied the top 3 floors of a sleek downtown skyscraper, its lobby more reminiscent of an exclusive art gallery than an office with its marble floors and security that scrutinized her with professional suspicion. The guards' concealed weapons created subtle bulges beneath their tailored suits as they escorted her to the private elevator. Anatoli waited in an office larger than her entire apartment, standing before floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased Chicago's glittering skyline like a kingdom spread beneath him. He turned as she entered, his expression unreadable as he gestured toward a chair across from his imposing desk. "Your Russian is exceptional, Miss Petrova," he stated without preamble, pronouncing her surname with the proper inflection that Americans always mangled. "It suggests an education beyond what a typical waitress might receive." His words carried no accusation, merely an observation that demanded explanation. Alina straightened her spine, instinct telling her that showing fear would be a critical mistake in this room. "My grandmother insisted I maintain my heritage after we immigrated when I was 7, she answered, omitting the complicated reasons for their abrupt departure from Moscow all those years ago. His eyes narrowed slightly, the gesture so subtle she nearly missed it before he slid a folder across the polished surface of his desk. "I require someone with your linguistic skills for a series of business dinners with associates from Moscow, St. Petersburg, and Kiev," he explained, watching her reaction with unsettling intensity. "I'm just a waitress," she protested weakly, though her fingers betrayed her by reaching for the folder that contained details of a salary that made her monthly rent look like pocket change. The desperation in her gesture didn't go unnoticed by his calculating gaze. A ghost of a smile touched his lips as he responded, "We both know that's not entirely true, Ms. Petrova." His finger tapped a document that contained details about her life she'd never shared with anyone in Chicago. "Your degree in international relations suggests considerably more ambition." She swallowed hard, realizing he'd investigated her thoroughly in those 3 intervening days. "How did you—" she began, then stopped herself, understanding the foolishness of such a question in the presence of a man whose power clearly extended far beyond legitimate business channels. "The position is simple," he continued, as though her discomfort was irrelevant. "You will accompany me to meetings, translate nuances that might escape others, and observe the unspoken subtexts that occur in such negotiations." His description sounded almost reasonable, if one ignored the underlying current that hinted at far more dangerous expectations. The rational part of her brain urged her to decline, to walk away from whatever web she was being drawn into. But the photograph that slipped from the folder paralyzed her with shock. It showed her grandmother's small suburban home, the implication unmistakable, even without a direct threat being voiced. "When do I start?" She heard herself asking, the words emerging from some self-preserving instinct that recognized the illusion of choice for what it was, a courtesy rather than a reality. The weight of invisible chains settled around her shoulders as Anatoli's satisfied expression confirmed her capitulation. The first dinner took place at a private club, so exclusive its entrance was unmarked, identified only by the discreet security personnel, who nodded respectfully as Anatoli approached with Alina at his side. Her black cocktail dress felt like a costume, the elegant simplicity chosen specifically by the stylist Anatoli had sent to her apartment that morning. "Remember," Anatoli murmured, as they paused before entering, his hand warm against the small of her back. "You are simply observing and translating, nothing more." The warning in his voice was unmistakable, reinforcing the danger of her position as they stepped into a world of wealth she had only glimpsed from the periphery as a server. 3 Russian businessmen rose as they approached, their polite smiles not reaching calculating eyes that assessed her with undisguised curiosity. The oldest man, his silver hair contrasting with his vigorous handshake, spoke rapidly in Russian, immediately testing her skills with a colloquialism about beautiful distractions at serious meetings. Before Anatoli could respond, Alina replied with perfect diction, using an old Moscow proverb about beauty that conceals sharp minds, causing the older man's eyebrows to lift in surprise before he barked out an appreciative laugh. The subtle shift in the room's atmosphere was immediate, tension easing slightly as she established herself as more than decorative. Dinner proceeded with deceptive pleasantness, fine wines and excellent food accompanying discussions that seemed innocuous, until Alina caught the double meanings concealed in seemingly ordinary business terminology. References to shipping routes and import challenges clearly masked conversations about territorial control and enforcement. As the evening progressed, she noticed how the men increasingly directed their comments toward her rather than Anatoli, a development that created a muscle tic along his jawline, despite his outwardly relaxed demeanor. His possessive hand returned to her back, fingers pressing slightly harder than necessary as a subtle warning. The atmosphere changed abruptly when the oldest Russian mentioned a family name she recognized from her childhood, Baronov, causing both Anatoli and the other men to glance sharply in her direction. Her heart pounded as she maintained a neutral expression, though the name conjured memories of whispered warnings from her grandmother years ago. The Baronovs have been making inquiries about certain historical artifacts they believe belong to them, the silver-haired man continued in Russian, his eyes never leaving Alina's face despite addressing Anatoli. Artifacts that disappeared from Moscow around 15 years ago, when certain families departed rather unexpectedly. Anatoli's hand tightened against her back, his response deliberately casual, though Alina felt the tension vibrating through him. The past should remain buried, Nikolai, he replied in Russian, especially when the present offers more profitable opportunities for all of us. Later, as they rode in silence back to her apartment, Alina gathered her courage to ask the question that had burned in her mind throughout the evening. Who are you really, and what do the Baronovs have to do with my family? Her voice remained steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. Anatoli studied her for a long moment, the passing streetlights casting alternating patterns of light and shadow across his aristocratic features. Your grandmother never told you why you left Russia so suddenly? He finally asked, watching her reaction with disturbing intensity, or why she chose Chicago specifically. The implications of his question sent ice through her veins as pieces of her fragmented childhood began shifting into new patterns. My grandmother said we came for better opportunities, like all immigrants, she answered, the rehearsed explanation sounding hollow even to her own ears. His laugh held no humor as he replied, Your grandmother, Irina Petrova, was keeper of the Baronov family's most valuable possession, their financial ledger, documenting decades of transactions both legitimate and otherwise. The revelation struck her with physical force, memories of her grandmother's paranoia suddenly making terrible sense. Tomorrow you'll accompany me to my family estate, Anatoli stated, his tone making it clear this was not a request. There are things about your past, our connected past, that you need to understand if you're going to survive the coming storm. His words carried the weight of prophecy, leaving her staring out the window at Chicago's familiar streets that suddenly seemed as foreign as the day she'd arrived as a frightened child. The Volkov estate sprawled across 20 acres of manicured grounds outside Chicago, the main house rising like a modernist fortress of glass and stone against the morning sky. Security cameras tracked their movement as Anatoli's car passed through 3 separate checkpoints before reaching the circular driveway. Alina's breath caught as they entered a library with ceiling-high bookshelves, but it was the portrait above the fireplace that froze her in place. A younger version of her grandmother standing beside a man who could only be Anatoli's father. The resemblance between generations was startling. The same piercing blue eyes and aristocratic features that somehow seemed both familiar and threatening. Your grandmother was my father's most trusted advisor, Anatoli explained, watching her reaction carefully as he moved toward an ornate chess set positioned by the window. She wasn't just the keeper of ledgers. She was the architect of our family's legitimate businesses, the reason we survived when others fell. He picked up the white queen, turning it between his fingers as he continued. The Baronovs were our rivals for generations, their methods brutal where we preferred strategy and discretion. His voice held an edge of personal hatred that suggested the rivalry transcended mere business competition. Alina circled the room slowly, absorbing details that reframed her entire childhood. Photos of her grandmother at business openings, newspaper clippings about corporate acquisitions. Why did we flee? She finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as pieces of her past realigned into a terrifying new pattern. Anatoli's expression darkened as he replaced the chess piece with deliberate care. The Baronovs discovered your grandmother had evidence of their worst crimes: money laundering, human trafficking, assassinations of government officials. He stepped closer, close enough that she could detect the subtle scent of his cologne, mingling with the leather and paper fragrance of the library. They butchered my father and his security team during what was supposed to be a peaceful negotiation, he continued, raw grief flashing briefly across his features before disappearing behind his controlled facade. Your grandmother escaped with you and the ledger, the only evidence that could have destroyed them completely. Heat rose to Alina's face as the implications crashed through her. You've been searching for us. For the ledger. All this time? The sense of betrayal was irrational given that she'd known him less than a week. Yet somehow the hurt felt deeply personal. His hand caught her wrist as she turned to leave, his grip firm but not painful as his eyes searched hers. At first, yes, he admitted, surprising her with his honesty. But finding you speaking perfect Russian in that restaurant, it felt like fate had circled back after 15 years. Something electric passed between them, tension of a different kind charging the air as his thumb traced an unconscious pattern against her pulse point. The Baronovs are in Chicago now, he murmured, releasing her wrist reluctantly. They've tracked the ledger here, which means your grandmother is in danger. Her world tilted again, fear for her grandmother overriding all other concerns. I need to warn her, she insisted, already reaching for her phone. But Anatoli shook his head, his expression grim as he pointed to a live security feed showing her grandmother's house surrounded by unmarked cars. My men are already there, extracting her safely, he assured her, guiding her to a seat as her knees threatened to buckle. But we need the ledger, Alina. It's the only leverage we have against what's coming. His voice grew gentle as he knelt before her, genuine concern replacing his usual calculated demeanor. She met his gaze directly, searching for deception, and finding instead a vulnerability that matched her own. I don't know about any ledger, she confessed, the frustration evident in her voice. Grandmother never told me anything about our past, about any of this. His hands covered hers, warm and surprisingly comforting despite everything. But she must have given you something to keep safe, something you wouldn't recognize as important. A book, a piece of jewelry, a family heirloom? The urgency in his question made her think harder, sorting through childhood memories for anything unusual. The memory surfaced suddenly, her 18th birthday, her grandmother presenting her with an antique music box, insisting she keep it close always. There's a music box, she whispered, watching Anatoli's expression transform with recognition. She said it contained our family's legacy. Dawn broke over the Chicago skyline as Anatoli's security team brought her grandmother to the estate, the elderly woman's face lined with worry, until she spotted Alina waiting in the grand foyer. They embraced fiercely, speaking rapid Russian that even Anatoli couldn't fully follow, a private dialect they had developed during their years in hiding. You should have told me, Alina whispered against her grandmother's silver hair, feeling both relief and lingering betrayal at the lifetime of secrets kept from her. The older woman's hands trembled slightly as she pulled back to cup Alina's face, her eyes seeking forgiveness. I wanted you to have a normal life, Devushka, her grandmother replied, using the childhood endearment that brought tears to Alina's eyes. But I always knew this day might come. Why I insisted you maintain your Russian. Why I taught you to observe people so carefully. Her words reframed skills Alina had taken for granted, as deliberate preparation for this very situation. Anatoli directed them to a secure conference room, where the music box now sat at the center of the table, its hand-painted exterior depicting a Russian winter scene that had fascinated Alina since childhood. Her grandmother approached it reverently, her fingers tracing a pattern across the decorative elements that Alina suddenly realized were not merely ornamental. The ledger isn't inside the box, her grandmother explained, pressing specific points in sequence until a soft click sounded from within. The box is the key to accessing where I hid the real ledger. The false bottom revealed not papers, but a small flash drive and a folded document yellowed with age. Anatoli's tech expert confirmed what they all suspected. The drive contained encrypted files that would take time to access without the proper passwords. The document, however, proved to be a deed to a safety deposit box in a Chicago bank, registered under a name Alina had never heard before. We move immediately, Anatoli decided, already issuing orders through his phone, as security feeds showed new vehicles approaching the outer perimeter of the estate. The Baronovs have tracked us here faster than anticipated. His calm efficiency contrasted with the barely controlled panic Alina felt rising in her chest. The journey to the bank proceeded with the precision of a military operation, 3 identical convoys departing simultaneously from the estate, while a helicopter stood ready on the private landing pad. Alina found herself in the lead car with Anatoli and her grandmother, the music box secure in a reinforced case between them. When we have the ledger, what happens then? She asked, watching the city blur past the bulletproof windows, trying to process how her ordinary life had vanished like morning mist. The question hung between them, heavy with implications for all their futures. Her grandmother exchanged a glance with Anatoli before answering. The ledger contains more than just evidence of Baronov crimes. It details every transaction, every partnership, every betrayal in Chicago's underworld for 3 decades. The older woman's voice held the weight of someone who had carried this burden too long alone. Anatoli's hand moved to cover Alina's on the seat between them, the gesture so natural it took her by surprise. With it, we can finally end the Baronov threat permanently, and potentially transform both our family's legacies into something legitimate. His vision seemed to extend beyond mere survival or revenge towards something redemptive. The bank's private client entrance admitted them without question. Anatoli's name opening doors that would have remained closed to others. The safety deposit room cleared of other patrons with a discreet word from the manager, leaving them alone with rows of metal boxes embedded in the walls. Her grandmother's hands shook slightly as she inserted the key, age and emotion making her movements less precise than usual. The box slid out smoothly, revealing not papers but another box, this one crafted of polished wood with the Volkov family crest inlaid in mother of pearl. "My father commissioned this before he died," Anatoli whispered, recognition and grief flashing across his features as he stared at the object his family had sought for 15 years. The moment felt sacred somehow, a convergence of past and present that held their collective futures in balance. The sound of gunfire shattered the reverent silence, distant at first but rapidly growing closer as alarm systems activated throughout the building. "They found us," Anatoli stated grimly, already reaching for his weapon as he positioned himself between the women and the door. "Take the box and go through the service exit. My men will meet you." Blood trickled from Anatoli's shoulder as they crouched behind the bulletproof sedan, the firefight between his security team and the Baronov forces, having followed them from the bank through downtown Chicago. Glass shattered around them as bullets struck the vehicle, each impact making Alina flinch while her grandmother clutched the wooden box to her chest like a child needing protection. "We can't stay here," Anatoli grunted, pain evident in his voice despite his efforts to conceal it as he checked the ammunition in his handgun. "Police response time in this district is under 3 minutes. Neither of our families can afford that kind of attention." His normally immaculate suit was torn and bloodied, yet he maintained the commanding presence that had intimidated her just days ago. Alina tore strips from her silk blouse to create a makeshift bandage for his wound, her fingers steady despite the chaos surrounding them. "There's a service entrance through that alley," she suggested, her waitressing experience suddenly providing unexpected value as she recalled the back routes between restaurants in this neighborhood. Her grandmother nodded approval as she reached into her purse to remove a small silver key that gleamed in the sunlight filtering through the smoke. "This opens my friend Ivanov's bakery 2 blocks east. We can reach it through the delivery tunnels that connect these old buildings." The older woman's resourcefulness reminded Alina that she came from a long line of survivors. They moved in staggered formation, Anatoli's injured body still somehow providing cover for the women as they navigated the narrow passage between buildings. The sounds of sirens grew louder, approaching from multiple directions as Chicago's finest responded to reports of gunfire in the financial district. The bakery's back room smelled of fresh bread and cinnamon, the normalcy of it creating a surreal contrast to the danger pursuing them. Ivanov, a barrel-chested man with a shock of white hair, asked no questions as he led them to a concealed room behind his walk-in freezer, a relic from Prohibition days when the building had housed a speakeasy. "We have perhaps 20 minutes before they track us here," Anatoli estimated, checking his phone for updates from his scattered security team. "We need to open the box now." The urgency in his voice matched the adrenaline coursing through Alina's veins, making her heart race with both fear and something else she wasn't ready to examine. Her grandmother's arthritic fingers struggled with the intricate lock mechanism until Alina gently took over, following the older woman's whispered instructions to press specific points in sequence. The box opened with a soft click to reveal not the expected documents, but a single sheet of paper containing a series of numbers and letters. "Coordinates and access codes," her grandmother explained, her voice steady despite her obvious exhaustion. "The actual ledger is digital now, stored on servers located at multiple sites, accessible only with these credentials." The revelation of such foresight impressed even Anatoli, whose expression shifted from pain to calculated assessment. He moved closer to examine the code, his body heat radiating against Alina's side as they bent over the paper together. "This changes everything," he murmured, fingers lightly tracing the characters as though confirming their reality. "With remote access, we can negotiate from any position of safety." A crash from the front of the bakery shattered their moment of hope, followed by Ivanov's voice rising in protest, before being silenced by what could only be a blow. "They found us," Alina whispered unnecessarily, fear clawing at her throat as she realized they were trapped in this concrete room with no other exits. Anatoli's expression hardened as he positioned himself between the women and the freezer door, his injured state doing nothing to diminish the predatory focus that transformed his features. "Alina, memorize that code now," he ordered, his voice leaving no room for question or hesitation. "Your grandmother and I will create a diversion." Her protest died on her lips as her grandmother pressed the paper into her hands with surprising strength. You were always meant to be the next keeper, Devushka, the older woman whispered fiercely, pressing a kiss to Alina's forehead that felt terrifyingly final. This legacy passes to you now. Use it wisely. Use it better than we did. The freezer door burst open before Alina could respond, revealing 3 men with weapons trained on them instantly. The leader stepped forward, his scarred face twisting into a triumphant smile as he recognized Anatoli and the older Petrova woman. 15 years we've hunted for you, old woman, he said in Russian, his voice carrying the harsh accent of Moscow's criminal districts. What happened next unfolded with dreamlike slowness, Anatoli lunging forward despite his injury, her grandmother revealing a small pistol from within her modest cardigan, the flash and thunder of gunfire in the enclosed space. Alina found herself shoved behind a metal shelf as bullets ricocheted off concrete walls, the paper clutched in her hand now crumpled and stained with what might have been her own blood, or someone else's. When the echoes faded, the scarred man lay dead alongside one of his companions, but Anatoli was on his knees, a fresh wound in his chest, turning his white shirt crimson with alarming speed. Her grandmother still stood, somehow unharmed, her small pistol trained steadily on the remaining Baronov enforcer, who had wisely dropped his weapon. "Run, Alina," Anatoli commanded through gritted teeth, his voice weaker but no less authoritative as he pressed something into her hand. A small keycard emblazoned with his family crest. "Safe house on Lakeshore Drive. My most trusted lieutenant will meet you there." The resignation in his eyes told her he didn't expect to follow. Her grandmother's voice followed Alina as she ran through the narrow back hallways of Chicago's oldest district, the ancient service corridors connecting buildings that predated Prohibition. Blood stained her hands, whether Anatoli's or someone else's. She couldn't tell in the dim emergency lighting. The keycard felt impossibly heavy in her pocket, a tangible reminder of promises made in desperation, as gunfire continued to echo behind her. Each intersection forced a split-second decision, her instincts guiding her through the labyrinth while mentally reciting the code. Chicago's afternoon rain had started, making the fire escape slick as she emerged into an alley 3 blocks from the bakery, the sounds of police sirens growing louder from multiple directions. The address Anatoli had whispered seemed impossibly far. Lakeshore Drive might as well have been another country. 2 college students sheltering from the rain under a coffee shop awning barely glanced at her as she approached, her waitressing skills surfacing as she manufactured a smile and casual tone. "Phone died. Could I possibly borrow yours for one quick call?" The Uber driver asked no questions about her disheveled appearance, simply nodding when she gave an address 3 blocks from the actual safe house location. Her grandmother's training echoed in her mind. Never go directly to your destination. Always watch for followers. Lakeshore Drive gleamed with wealth, the luxury high-rises overlooking Lake Michigan housing Chicago's elite. A world Alina had served but never belonged to until now. The doorman at the building didn't look twice at her as she swiped Anatoli's keycard. The penthouse suite revealed itself as an unexpected sanctuary, minimalist elegance in whites and blues reflecting the lake beyond floor-to-ceiling windows. A man in his 50s stood from a leather chair as she entered, his military bearing unmistakable, despite the expensive suit. "Ms. Petrova, I'm Pavel, Anatoli's security chief," he explained, gesturing toward a bedroom where clean clothes awaited. "You have 20 minutes to shower and change before we move again." His efficiency communicated more than his words. Time was precious now. Fresh clothes and the brief shower couldn't wash away the memory of Anatoli's blood or her grandmother's fierce determination as they'd created the diversion allowing her escape. The designer dress and coat waiting for her seemed surreal, preparations made for contingencies. "Your grandmother is secure at our secondary location," Pavel informed her as she emerged, handing her a secure phone with a single programmed number. "Anatoli is alive but in critical condition. He managed to eliminate the remaining Baronov men before extraction." Relief flooded through her, quickly followed by renewed determination as she clutched the phone like a lifeline. "The code. I need to access the ledger now before the Baronov organization regroups." The sequence of numbers and letters remained burned in her memory. Pavel's expression shifted subtly as he assessed her with newfound respect. "The workstation is ready," he said, leading her to a hidden room behind a sliding bookcase where multiple screens displayed security feeds alongside sophisticated encryption software. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitation momentarily paralyzing her as the magnitude of the moment crystallized. "What happens after we access it?" she asked, suddenly aware that she was about to cross a threshold from which there would be no return. "That decision belongs to you now," Pavel answered with unexpected deference, revealing a shift in power dynamics she hadn't anticipated. Anatoli made it clear before surgery. Whoever holds the ledger controls what happens next. Alina entered the sequence with steady hands, each character bringing her closer to the truth that had shaped her life from shadows. The screen flashed momentarily before filling with data, transaction records, account numbers, and territorial agreements spanning decades of Chicago's criminal landscape. 3 weeks passed in a blur of security briefings, clandestine hospital visits, and endless analysis of the ledger's contents as Alina stepped into a role she'd never imagined for herself. Anatoli's recovery progressed slowly in the private medical facility, his occasional lucidity providing crucial guidance. The Baronov organization had gone suspiciously quiet following the death of their Chicago lieutenants, a strategic retreat that Pavel warned was merely preparation for a more significant counterattack. Intelligence reports indicated their leader, Dmitry Baronov himself, had flown in from Moscow. "He blames your grandmother for his father's imprisonment 15 years ago," Pavel explained during their morning security briefing, sliding photos across the conference table of a sharp-featured man in his 60s arriving at a private airstrip outside the city. Her grandmother's health had deteriorated under the strain, though her mind remained razor-sharp as she helped Alina understand the complex web of relationships documented in the ledger. "Your parents would be proud," the older woman whispered, during a rare moment of vulnerability. Anatoli's first coherent conversation from his hospital bed changed everything, his voice weak, but his eyes burning with intensity as he grasped her hand. "We need to end this cycle, Alina," he insisted, struggling to sit up despite his injuries. The whispered conversations they shared during those midnight hospital visits revealed a different Anatoli than the cold businessman she'd first encountered. He spoke of a childhood dream to legitimize his family's enterprises, a vision his father had dismissed as naive idealism before his assassination. Medical staff had been carefully vetted and rotated frequently, Pavel's security protocols extending even to the nurses who monitored Anatoli's vital signs. The Baronov network had infiltrated Chicago's healthcare system before, resulting in the mysterious deaths of 3 hospitalized Volkov associates over the past decade. The FBI surveillance team watching the hospital entrance was an unexpected complication, their presence confirming Pavel's intelligence that federal authorities had taken interest in the recent violence. "They've been monitoring both families for years," Pavel reported quietly. Alina's economics degree suddenly proved valuable as she worked through nights analyzing the legitimate businesses intertwined with criminal enterprises, identifying pathways to separate one from the other. "We can transform the Volkov operations completely," she explained to Anatoli. The Baronov ultimatum arrived via an old-world messenger, a young boy delivering a sealed envelope to the front desk of Volkov Imports, with instructions to place it directly in Alina's hands. The message inside was simple: a meeting at neutral territory, the Chicago Botanical Gardens. "It's a trap," Pavel stated flatly when she showed him the invitation, his security team already running scenarios for extraction if she insisted on attending. "Dmitry Baronov doesn't negotiate. He eliminates threats and leaves no witnesses." Anatoli surprised them all by supporting her decision to accept, his voice stronger as his recovery progressed. "Sometimes the bravest strategy is the one your enemy least expects," he counseled from his hospital bed, their roles reversed as she sought his guidance. The Botanical Gardens orchid display room provided the perfect setting for their confrontation: neutral territory with multiple exits, limited access points for security teams, and enough public presence to discourage immediate violence. Alina arrived precisely on time, her grandmother's Russian resilience evident in her posture. Dmitry Baronov entered flanked by 2 bodyguards, his expensive suit and aristocratic bearing masking the predatory assessment in his eyes as he approached. "The last time I saw you, you were a child hiding behind your grandmother's skirts," he observed in Russian. "The ledger has been secured with multiple deadman switches," Alina stated without preamble, her voice steady as she met his gaze directly. "If anything happens to me, my grandmother, or Anatoly Volkov, the contents will be delivered to the FBI, Interpol, and your competitors." His laugh held genuine surprise rather than mockery, an acknowledgement of her unexpected boldness. So, like your mother, she too believed she could outmaneuver men who had been playing this game for generations. The casual mention of her mother sent ice through Alina's veins. "I'm not here to outmaneuver you," she countered, opening the leather portfolio she'd brought to reveal detailed financial projections and business proposals. "I'm offering something your father and Anatoly's never considered, a legitimate path forward that benefits both families." 1 year later, The grand reopening of Volkov Petrova International Investments drew Chicago's business elite to the gleaming new headquarters overlooking the river. Reporters gathered in the marble lobby, speculation running rampant about the mysterious partnership that had transformed a relatively obscure import company. Anatoli stood at Alina's side on the podium, his physical recovery complete, though he occasionally relied on a cane during lengthy events. Their professional partnership had evolved into something deeper during the intense months of transformation, mutual respect blooming into carefully guarded affection. Our family's histories have been intertwined for generations, Alina addressed the gathered crowd, her confidence in public speaking having grown alongside her business acumen. Today marks not just a new chapter for our company, but a model for how old rivalries can transform into productive partnerships. The agreement with Dmitry Baronov had proven surprisingly durable, his business instincts ultimately overriding his thirst for vengeance when presented with Alina's comprehensive plan for legitimacy. Revenge is satisfying, but profitability is sustainable, he had acknowledged during their fourth negotiation session. Federal authorities maintained discreet surveillance, their suspicions unable to penetrate the meticulously legal restructuring overseen by the country's top financial and legal teams. The transformation from criminal enterprises to legitimate businesses had been executed with surgical precision. Her grandmother watched from the front row, pride evident in her eyes as she witnessed the culmination of sacrifices spanning 3 generations. The elderly woman had finally begun sharing stories of Alina's parents, their brilliance, their principles, and their dreams for a different future. Behind the scenes, the transition had required delicate negotiations with political figures whose campaigns had received questionable donations for decades. Alina had leveraged the ledger's contents not for blackmail, but to forge accountability agreements that benefited Chicago's underserved neighborhoods. The architectural design of their headquarters itself symbolized the transformation. The building preserved the historic facade of a century-old bank, while incorporating cutting-edge sustainable technology inside. Like their business model, it honored tradition, while embracing a forward-looking vision. The emerald pendant at Alina's throat caught the morning light, casting verdant reflections across the podium as she continued her address. The jewelry had been Anatoli's gift, delivered the night before with a handwritten note explaining its significance, a Volkov family heirloom. True strength emerges from hardship, she concluded, deliberately echoing the Russian proverb she had quoted that first night as a waitress, making Anatoli smile at the callback to their unexpected beginning. And true wisdom comes from transforming conflict into cooperation. Later, as champagne flowed and business cards exchanged hands in the reception hall, Alina found a moment of quiet on the balcony overlooking the Chicago skyline. The city sprawled before her, no longer divided into invisible territories, but unified in her new understanding. Anatoli joined her silently, his presence now a comfort, rather than a threat as he stood beside her at the railing. "Your parents would be proud," he said softly, echoing her grandmother's words from months earlier. "You've accomplished what they died trying to achieve." "Sometimes the most important revolutions happen quietly," she replied, watching the afternoon sun glint off distant Lake Michigan. No gunfire, no headlines, just the steady transformation of systems from within. The philosophy had become their shared vision, guiding decisions. Pavel approached discreetly, maintaining his protective vigilance despite the celebration. "Mr. Baronov has arrived with his delegation," he informed them, his tone neutral, though his eyes conveyed caution. "They're waiting in the private conference room as arranged." Anatoli's hand found hers momentarily, a brief connection conveying strength, before they returned to their separate roles in the carefully choreographed dance of new alliances. "Ready?" he asked, offering his arm with formal courtesy that concealed deeper currents. "I was ready the moment I served you that bottle of Bordeaux," she answered with unexpected lightness. The memory of their first meeting transformed from threatening to foundational in the narrative they were creating together, though I had no idea where it would lead. The shy waitress who had accidentally stumbled into a world of power and danger had disappeared, replaced by a woman who navigated both with natural authority. Her Russian heritage, once hidden as a childhood memory, now served as the bridge between competing interests. Thank you to everyone for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please write in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video, as your support is crucial for me to continue creating content for you.